episode, Ken. Good to see you. Love the new backdrop. And also, actually, I'll start here real quick. I loved the end of Fair Territory where you shouted at the YouTube commenters and said how you've seen some kind words. And I will agree with you that I think there is often kind compliments and justified comments, that like have some legitimacy to them versus just your typical trolling action. Do you agree?
Totally agree. And that's why I said that yesterday. I don't often look at comments other than really to scan them, because if you do that, you have a very low self-image after reading them. But I have at times glanced at the YouTube comments, and they've been, to me, surprisingly civil and, as you said, insightful compared to what I usually get both on X and even in the Athletic comments. So listen, sometimes I deserve negative comments or they're warranted, but overall it seems like YouTube, it's just been a better experience for whatever reason. And I said that because I was grateful for it. That's all.
I like that a lot. All right, so let's get to the notes. So what stood out to me, and I guess in the storylines too, in Fair Territory, is extension season. It has
Yes.
essentially arrived as players get to camp. Are there any potential extension candidates that you have your eye on for the next month or so?
Zack Wheeler above all. And I know there's been a lot of talk about Tucker and Bregman. I don't expect Bregman to sign an extension. Tucker, perhaps, but it's not going to be easy. But Zack Wheeler is a guy the Phillies want to retain. I expect they will retain him. And at some point in March, I figure we're going to hear an announcement. Zack Wheeler is back with the Phillies. Or not back, but extended beyond this year.
All right. I agree. First of all, Ken, before I ask my question, you make baseball come alive, apparently, which is amazing. I love that.
AJ, you know what that is?
I don't.
Is, AJ? All right, I'll tell you what it is. So 1989, I was covering the Orioles for the Baltimore Evening Sun. And back in the day, when there were newspapers sold in newspaper boxes, I know this happens in some cities still, but that was the newspaper box insert that they put in there to get people to buy the paper. I don't know that anybody did buy the paper because of that, but that group of players there, AJ, you'll like this. It's Randy Milligan, it's Joe Orsulak, it's Ben McDonald, it's all these guys from the 89 Orioles.
Okay. All right. I like it. It just doesn't look like you. That's what more drew my attention.
Well, because it's almost 35 years ago. That's why.
Yeah, but you just look so much taller, but that's a different, we'll get to that later, Junior. All right. So you mentioned extensions and the fact that, you think Wheeler might be the one. There's a lot of free agents out there still, and it's February 13th. Almost every team reports in the next few days, let's say the next 3 or 4 days, right? By Sunday, they're all in camp. Are these 4 guys, mainly the 4 Boris guys, are they going to sign? Soler obviously signed late last night, but the 4 Boris guys are still the main names out there. Are they going to sign, and when?
They'll sign at some point. And I expect with the pitchers in particular that they'll sign and they'll do still pretty well as they might have otherwise. Because what I expect to happen this spring, and I hate saying this because it almost sounds like you're wishing for this to happen, it's just a reality though. Pitchers are going to get hurt. Pitchers on contending teams are going to get hurt. Teams are going to have needs arise, and suddenly they're going to grow more interested in adding a Blake Snell or a Jordan Montgomery than they might have been otherwise. So they'll sign. Bellinger's going to sign. Matt Chapman's going to sign. I guess the bigger question, AJ, is what kinds of deals do they end up with? And that's what we don't know right now. There's still some money in the game. There are still teams that need these players. The Blue Jays are looking for a hitter. The Giants reached agreement with Soler, as Susan Slusser reported early this morning, but they could still use Matt Chapman. So I expect that these guys will all do okay, at least okay in a representative sense compared to what we thought they would do. But it remains to be seen still just how all this is going to play out and whether one of these guys or more will take a deal that we didn't really expect him to get, a deal less than what we expected. And we'll see how it goes.
I want to hit a little bit on extensions again. The fact, is there ever a scenario where we're going to sit there and go, okay, we're going to put this in the collective bargaining agreement that a team keeps a Kyle Tucker example so that we keep players in one place forever? Now you get some type of like you get an extra pick, or you get something so that it encourages the Astros to keep, the Pirates to keep, the Reds to keep their homegrown players in their cities, which we're always clamoring for. And there's always tons of people who are saying, oh, free agents. Well, it's just the big markets can only take the free agents. Is there ever a scenario where we could see that happening?
Eric, it's an interesting thought. I don't know if I can see it happening, and I don't know that the teams would be eager to do that, or the Major League Baseball side would be eager to do that. But it's an interesting concept because it would give a team an enhancement to sign a homegrown player long term. Now, they'd have to define homegrown player. I guess it would have to be a player you either draft or signed internationally. But what about a guy like Tatis, for instance? The Padres traded for him when he was in low minors. Would he count? But that's neither here nor there. The concept is interesting. I don't see it as a restriction on the free market. That's something, of course, the union would oppose. But I don't know that it will happen either. In fact, I don't know that it's ever been proposed along those lines. And maybe it's something I should look into and start asking questions about, because it is an interesting idea in the sense that I just mentioned. It doesn't restrict the market. It's simply giving a bonus, essentially, to a team that embarks upon this kind of course.
I know you're not a prognosticator of numbers, but what would it take for Soto to sign an extension? Because you said in fair territory, it's not happening. It's not happening. He already turned down 440. What kind of realm are we looking that, not even in free agency, in Scott Boras land of extensions, because he did it with Strasburg, and that really didn't work out for the Nats so far. What would it look like for Soto?
Strasburg actually was a free agent when he signed, Eric. He did re-sign, but he was a free agent. Altuve is an example of an extension that Boras did have and was representing. The thing is, if you start with a number, let's pick $500 million as an example. Scott Boras might say, well, that's the floor. And now we can go to free agency with that as the floor. The other thing about an extension for a guy like Soto, and let's just play this out, even though I don't see it as realistic at all. If you're Boras, what you want the Yankees to do in that scenario is buy him out of free agency, or give him enough money so he won't go to free agency. That's a better way of putting it. What's that number? What's the number that Juan Soto might get in free agency? Is it $600 million? Is it $550? I don't know. But the Yankees would have to go to some level like that to essentially buy him out of his rights to become a free agent. And it's the same question all over again. If they offer $550, for instance, or $600, Boras then says, well, the Yankees were willing to do that in a non-open market situation. What might a team do in an open market situation? So for Juan Soto, he's going to be a 26-year-old free agent. The world is his oyster. And I expect he's going to have a big year, and I expect he's going to hit the open market and do really, really well.
Ken, what did you think of the Soler signing by the Giants? It seems like it fits a need for him, brings him a power bat. I already said he's probably going to be the first guy, if he stays healthy, to hit 30 homers since 2004 in a Giants uniform. That's 20 years ago. That's amazing in a world where home runs are king right now. What did you think of it? We all probably thought he might get a little bit more, maybe longer years, but it seems like a good signing for both sides. Your thoughts?
I liked it. And he opted out of Miami to go to the market and get a multi-year deal. So for Soler, this looks like a good place for him. Obviously, it's not a great place to hit. We know that. But his kind of power, as you said, AJ, he should hit 30 in any ballpark. He did it in Miami just fine. It's not exactly the most hitting-friendly environment. So for him, it's okay. And keep in mind, he's not an outfielder. He's a DH, and you're always with that handicap as a free agent. For the Giants, I liked it too. And I like it because they need right-handed power. And yes, they've been involved with Chapman and Bellinger after signing Lee to play center field. But you have to have somebody. And they've been rejected so often. To get him in the fold, Soler, and now maybe go after Chapman as well, and then maybe make some trades with some of your excess, then you have something a little bit more interesting than certainly what they had last year. So I did like it from the Giants' perspective, and for Soler, I thought it was fine. I didn't think as a DH he was ever going to crush it, and this is about where you would expect he would have been.
Where does this put the Giants in your mind in the division for now? Obviously, I'm sure the Dodgers are in a different category. The Diamondbacks are coming off a really strong offseason, and I still think the Giants have at least one more move left in them, and that could vault them, say, over being in the Padres realm. Because, I mean, this team for most of the season was in playoff contention, the Giants. They didn't do anything at the deadline, and they kind of fell off at the end, but they were close.
I agree, Scott. And they do have one more big move in them. And actually, I believe several moves, because maybe it's one addition and then some subtractions that maybe bring you other things, right? So they're a work in progress still. They're not by any means fully formed. If they get Chapman, then J.D. Davis becomes expendable. He actually might even be expendable right now. Andrew Baggerly of The Athletic mentioned that Conforto might be expendable. You can do some things now with different players and maybe get some pitching back. They kind of need right now, with them waiting for Alex Cobb and Robbie Ray to come back after the All-Star game, they need some immediate rotation help among the offensive shortcomings that they have. So if they could perhaps pull something like that off, one of the hitters for one of the pitchers, not a free agent, I'm talking about a trade, then maybe that would be something that they should do. And there are still some free agent starters out there as well. Michael Lorenzen is out there, Eric Lauer, a number of different lesser free agents. Mike Clevenger is another one, but guys who can at least give you innings until those two big starters come back in the second half.
And to close the book on this signing, he also is departing essentially now from Miami. I mean, he was with the team and had a monster season, earned this contract with the Giants. So the aftermath for the Marlins, I know, they acquired Berger and Josh Bell at the trade deadline and felt like that was kind of the power boost or power fill-in for those players. I'm also just looking at Soler and wondering still if they should have offered, the $20 million. I'm having a hard time thinking that he was going to accept that. I know technically that was more per year, but that's where a team like the Marlins is supposed to be able to get a draft pick out of it, right?
Scott, you're absolutely right. And I've written about this. If you're a team that is not going to spend money and professes to be building, which is where the Marlins are right now, then how do you not make Jorge Soler a qualifying offer? If for some reason he accepts, it's 1 year. It's $20 million, you're good. They didn't want to do that, and it cost them. It's going to cost them a draft pick, obviously. But going beyond that, where are the Marlins in general? I've been asking this question all off season. They traded for Nick Gordon. Okay, he's a fine super utility type guy. Still need a shortstop. They're looking at Gio Urshela possibly to play third base and have Berger move to first and Bell DH at times. They can do some different things if they get Urshela. But, man, the shortstop hole is vast. The power gap is significant. And yet they still are not really doing anything. What they are trying to accomplish under their new GM, Peter Bendix, is kind of an overhaul of their infrastructure and to make things better in the farm department, the international program. I get all that. I never understand why teams can't do two things at once. And you can do the infrastructure, and apparently, from everything I've heard, it's needed. They have a long way to go along those lines. But my gosh, you do not ignore the major league product coming off the year that they had, and yet that is exactly what they're doing.
Well, Ken, they've signed as many free agents as dinners you've bought me over the years. So it's the exact same, zero. Exactly. It's the exact same number over these years. So, I mean, you should be a huge Marlins fan at this point. Last question from us. You wrote about Billy Eppler. We spoke about it on Friday. Did you find out more information? And the more I hear about this, the more I just think it's complete and utter, excuse my language, bullshit. He wasn't in the game this year. He's taken basically a vacation for the year. I think he's still getting paid by the Mets a little bit. So it's really like, we're going to slap him on the wrist, even though he's not involved. And we'll prove a point to everybody else, don't do this, even though everybody I've seen, everything I've read, everyone I've watched says every team does this.
It's more than a slap on the wrist, AJ. It's a year suspension. And that is not insignificant. So from that perspective, as I wrote, they're trying to make an example out of him. And they claim that they have evidence, more evidence than they usually have in these kinds of things when it's mostly he said, she said type of accusations that take place. But at the same time, as I also wrote, because he's not employed by a team right now, by giving him this penalty, you're not ticking off any owner. You're Rob Manfred, you're good. He's a guy that's out there, he's not employed. He could be made an example of quite easily. And quite easily because, yes, they did have more evidence from this anonymous tip than they normally have. They followed up on the anonymous tip, found out what Billy Eppler was doing. And yes, he was doing these things where you falsify injured list placements. Okay. But yes, other teams do it. I don't know if it's every other team, but it's certainly not an uncommon practice in the game. You could interpret this as a warning sign from Rob Manfred to the other teams saying, hey, guys, we're not going to tolerate this anymore. And that's fine. But it sure seems like Billy Eppler was, in an unfortunate way, the chosen one here. And that's why he got the penalty that he did.
And he was the only one. He was the only one that knew about
Only
this.
one in the Mets
only one
organization
acting
that
like
knew.
this.
Only Mets
Yeah,
organization that knew.
That's a hard thing to believe. That's hard to swallow. That.
I don't know why they said that. Just leave that out of the press release.
I mean, come on.
That part I had.
But he
a
was.
problem with.
My whole thing though is he's not working this year anyway. So it's like, I mean, I know a year suspension is a long thing.
They can reinstate him too. That was important.
But
If he somehow gets a job in
That is
June,
this year anyway. So
he can apply for reinstatement and possibly get reinstated. Who knows? Maybe at the All-Star break. But at the same time, it's his name, and now it has this asterisk on it, for lack of a better phrase. And I'm sure it's hurt him deeply that he's the one who got this penalty. I don't know that he would say, hey, I was completely innocent here, but are any other teams that innocent? That would be the point I'd make.
Yeah, it's silly. But thank you, Ken. Appreciate the time. We'll talk to you later this week.
Thanks, guys.
All right. So fair territory is out there for the world.